I'm Takeshi, and you're watching Kojima Racing.
I'd like to welcome everyone back to the channel, this time for another transmission swap video. This one, like the last one, will be in a slideshow format, as both transmission swaps I performed were before I started this channel and had all the fancy cameras and software. This swap in particular I performed at the dawn of the digital camera age back in 2008, so I'll need to apologize in advance for the quality of some of the slides, as they were shot using a JDM 6 megapixel Casio digital camera with no wide angle capability. This swap was performed on Dark Horse, my 1991 Mustang LX Fox Body Special Service Pack car, shown here as it appears today, finally getting prepped for paint. I used to campaign this car in NHRA drag racing street classes and spent the money on being quick and reliable and not so much on being good looking. In fact, all the primer hid the truth about the car being mechanically new and significantly built, giving it a bit of a sleeper effect. This swap was a T5 5-speed manual to TKO 5-speed manual swap with all the accessories. We'll get started on that right after I tell you about my sponsor. Clean Slate Auto Detailing, located at 1910 Fort Jones Road in Yreka, California. If you live in or around Siskiyou County, there is no one better for your auto detailing needs. I'm proud to represent Clean Slate Auto Detailing, as I am also a patron. Not only do I trust Clean Slate with my Shelby GT500 and all my other personal vehicles, but also my pest control company's service vehicles. Here is my very roughly used F-150 service truck, the Exterminator, after Clean Slate made it look brand new again. That's Clean Slate Auto Detailing, 1910 Fort Jones Road in Yreka, California. Call 530-598-4364 for scheduling. All right, let's get started. Here is Dark Horse shown pulling a wheel on launch around the time before I performed the transmission swap on her, and this is where you would likely find me on any given weekend during that time period. There are many different reasons why someone might perform a transmission swap on a Fox body, and currently it is predominantly done to swap in a newer engine like a Coyote. In the past, it was mostly done to switch between manual and automatic, add or subtract gears, or, such as in my case, for durability. Although my Fox body was only running high 12s to low 13s in the quarter mile, it was cranking out 1.7 second 60-foot times and 7-second eighth mile times on a Mickey Thompson 10.5-inch ET Street wrinkle wall drag tire. This means it was doing the majority of its acceleration on the small end of the track, which is extremely hard on drivetrain parts. As most drag racers do, I would replace parts as they broke or wore out with something stronger. It started with a worn out clutch, which I upgraded to a metallic one, and of course a corresponding billet steel flywheel, then a scatter shield in case the clutch exploded or the flywheel came loose. Then I sheared an axle shaft, popped a wheel stud, U-joint, drive shaft, and finally had beaten the factory Borg-Warner T5 to the point it would pop out of third gear and was leaking fluid around every seam in the case. At this point, Tremec had acquired Borg-Warner and had supposedly upgraded the T5 to world-class spec. Since it was dimensionally the same, I figured it made the most financial sense and elected to preemptively upgrade to the world-class T5. Big mistake. I broke it on the third pass I made with it, splitting the shift fork down the length of it, and since it was so new, Tremec begrudgingly repaired it under warranty, and I was able to finish out 8 months of the season before I destroyed third gear just driving madly aggressive on the street. This is what finally led to the TKO swap in this video. For my viewers, if you want to do something similar, this video will serve as a step-by-step to the R&R procedure that I've performed countless times, and a drivetrain parts list of what I've found that works the best through over a decade of trial and error. This video could also serve as a manual swap step-by-step if you add in a clutch pedal hanger and A9L electronic engine control module. For more on the Dark Horse's mods and specs, refer back to my walk-around video. Okay, so now here is the fun part, which is unboxing all the shiny new parts that I ordered for the swap. I had 3 separate shipments. This was the first of the 3 shipments that arrived, and as I said before, I originally swapped a T5 to a T5 transmission because I wouldn't have to replace any of the parts that I used peripherally around the transmission. So the vast majority of these parts had to be replaced because the bolt pattern was different on the transmission where it mounts to the bell housing or scatter shield in this case, which is a liquid scatter shield. It's exactly the same style that I had with the T5, but this one is for the TKO. Then next, a Ram 300 series metallic clutch and diaphragm style pressure plate and a new billet steel flywheel because the input shaft had a different spline count on the TKO than it did on the T5, and then a new Ford Racing, which I believe was made by Strange, transmission slip yoke because the spline count was also different on the output shaft. And then we added on some other accessories and just replacement parts like the Ram release bearing, and then I have a BBK firewall clutch cable adjuster, BBK adjustable clutch cable, and then the aluminum multi-hook clutch pedal quadrant that goes under the dash, as well as some B&M trick shift automatic transmission fluid as the TKO takes automatic transmission fluid. In my second shipment, I got a clutch alignment tool, some new dowel pins for my billet steel flywheel, a new Pro 5.0 tower short throw shifter, which I already had on the T5, but of course it doesn't fit on the TKO, and then a new transmission cross-member mount for the rear of the transmission. As you can see, it's offset to the rear to make room for the larger TKO, and it's also made out of anodized steel, which is very nice. And the third and final shipment, which was the transmission. Tremec actually makes 4 different models of the TKO, which I believe stands for Technical Knockout, and they are a close ratio 500, a wide ratio 500, a close ratio 600, and a wide ratio 600. The number in the model name denotes the torque handling capacity of the transmission. So a 500 would handle 500 foot-pounds of torque, and the 600 would handle 600 foot-pounds of torque respectively. So I selected a wide ratio TKO 600. And now we can install. Of course, I've got to get the blown T5 out of the way first, so before you jack up the car, you need to take the shifter off, shift boot, the shift knob, and the bezel ring, and then you can lift the car up and support it so you can work from the bottom. Of course, I don't necessarily recommend doing that the way I did it with a Craftsman floor jack and a couple of jack stands and a 100-piece portable Craftsman tool set, but that's what I had to work with at the time, and I did many things with just those simple tools. The next step is to remove your driveline bolts at the differential, and you'll want to locate a slip yoke from the same drive shaft to use as a plug in the back of your transmission so you don't have to try and drain it out and get transmission fluid everywhere and have a big mess. I sourced this slip yoke off of one of the aforementioned drive shafts that I had broken, and then you're just going to want to gently slide out your drive shaft and trade it with the slip yoke to use as the transmission plug. Next, you're going to want to take out your O2 sensors and your air injection tube to your catalytic converters. And yes, my drag car still had catalytic converters on it and an air pump and the whole bit. Then you're going to unbolt your H pipe at the back of the headers and where they go into the mufflers. And you can drop your H pipe. I might add that my H pipe had no exhaust hangers on it that went to the trans mount because of tolerance issues with all the aftermarket parts. In fact, here you can see where I've added another threaded bung onto the H pipe so I could move the oxygen sensors where they were not in contact with the liquid scatter shield's flange. Everyone kept telling me to just trim the scatter shield, but if you do that, then it loses its SFI rating and it's not as safe. After dropping your H pipe, now you can get to your transmission. So you need to undo the bolts on the trans crossmember rear mount and remove it, supporting your transmission with a transmission jack. Unplug your reverse circuit and your speedometer cable, and then you can back out your bell housing bolts and drop your transmission. Here's what a less than a year old blown world-class T5 transmission looks like. And here's the scatter shield looking all beat from being taken in and out so many times with different transmissions. A big pile of grade 8 hardware that came out of the bell housing, which is a major pain in the ass, taking out all those nuts and bolts all the time. And then the clutch cable, which looks like it was about ready to break. Have to remove that, and then on to removing the starter, and then you can pull the bell housing. Now you can access and remove the pressure plate, and the clutch disc, and billet steel flywheel. And pretty sure I sold this all as a package to a friend of mine with the blown transmission to be reutilized. Here you can see the back of my GT40 aluminum heads, which look nice and shiny up there on top of the engine block. And you can see that there's a little bit of seepage coming from the rear main seal. So while you've got the engine exposed on the backside like this, it's worthwhile to replace your rear main seal. Now it's time to put it back together. However, there is one little detail that you got to do before you get to the fun shiny stuff, and that is trimming the rubber shift boot shroud off at the first cup, and you'll see why later. Now you're going to hang your bell housing backing plate on the block dowel pins, and that'll allow you to bolt on your billet steel flywheel with all ARP bolts, of course, and a new pilot bearing torqued to the proper spec. Now you're going to hold your clutch disc in place with your clutch alignment tool, and that'll allow you to install your pressure plate. It is critical at this point that you use the manufacturer's recommended torque specifications. Now you need to install your clutch fork inside of your bell housing on the pivot ball with your new release bearing, and then bolt it to the back of the engine block and the backing plate with all the grade 8 hardware. Install your clutch cable firewall adjuster. Run your cable down and bolt it to the subframe. Run it through the firewall and attach it to the aluminum billet clutch quadrant under the dash, and then through to your clutch fork just outside of your bell housing. Reinstall your starter, and you're just about ready to install the transmission. The TKO does come with its own short thorough shifter already mounted on it. However, I wanted to use the Pro 5.0 shifter because it had adjustable positive stops on it that help to prevent damage to the transmission when you're power shifting. Now I had to swap the rear rubber isolator mount over to the other transmission, and I did not want to use a solid mount because my Mustang is street driven. Comparing the two transmissions side by side, you can see the spline count is much higher on the input and output shafts, and the case is larger, has more access ports, and then the input shaft clock register is way more beefy on the TKO than it is on the T5. You'll want to use your transmission jack to raise up the transmission and get it to stab into your clutch pressure plate package, and it should slide right in if you did the work properly with your clutch alignment tool and the torque specifications. Don't force it. Before you remove your transmission jack, you'll want to put in your adapter crossmember mount and bolt it in so that it's supporting the transmission before you remove the transmission jack, and plug in all of your wiring harnesses and your speedometer cable. You'll remember that I told you to trim off your rubber shift boot shroud, and here's why. The TKO sits significantly higher than the T5. Swap out your transmission slip yoke on your drive shaft and install your drive shaft. You are going to want to fill your transmission with transmission fluid before you reinstall your H-pipe, as it will be far too cramped to do so after you've installed the exhaust. Your final step is to go ahead and install your H-pipe and put your oxygen sensors back in. You'll notice that there are extremely tight tolerances all around the oxygen sensors and the top of the H-pipe where it is closest to the K-member and the scatter shield flange. This was a complete nightmare trying to work the H-pipe back into position. So there you have it. That's the transmission swap from a T5 to a TKO in Project Dark Horse, my 1991 Fox Body Mustang. If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.